So this lesson is about EU public procurement and European programs and funds. What are the learning goals? First, we will overview the public market and the public procurement programs and funds. We will say a few words about the legal text and principles for EU public procurement. And we will end this lesson by examining the key challenges and opportunities when dealing with governments. So let's look to the European public market. Well, EU public procurement represents 2 trillion euro per year. That's around 14% of the total EU GDP. There are 250,000 public authorities, and you know what? More than 2,000 procurement notices are published daily. With respect to the European public funds and programs, they cover a value of 1.4 trillion euro for the EU budgetary period 21-27. Well, again, that's a significant portion of the EU GDP. There are around 154 contracting authorities and more than 50 public funds. So what are the key takeaways about the public market? Well, first, I'm amazed personally about the evolution compared to, let's say, the end of the last century. Let's say 25 years ago, at that time, my guess is that the combined value of the public procurement and public funds and programs was in the range of, let's say, 2 to 5% of the EU GDP. And currently, we're probably around 25%. In reality, in the EU, more than 40% of the companies benefit from public procurement. And as you probably know, most startups and SMEs benefit from some form of public support. So that's the raison d'être about these lessons. It's so important to know the public sector well. So now let's discuss the similarities and the differences between EU public procurement and EU public funding programs and funds and programs. Well, in both cases, there is a contract, right? And the contract is funded by the EU budget. Also, in both cases, the general policy priorities apply. In fact, this is the case because the money comes from the EU budget, and the EU budget, as such, is subject to those priorities. But in the case of the public procurement rules, as their name indicate, they are only relevant for public procurement. In the case of European programs and funds, each program is governed, I'm afraid, by specific rules, which means in practice that you need to know them fund by fund, program by program. In the case of public funds and programs, advance payments are allowed. By contrast, for public procurement, payment is based on agreed terms and conditions, and reimbursement occurs for real costs. Deliverable for public funds is more a report or completion of a specific activity or a project, and in case of procurement, it's simply execution according to contractual conditions. So now I need to say a few words about the legal text and principles governing EU public procurement. We will not enter into details, don't be afraid, but you need to know that there is a hierarchy in terms of the legal text and principles, and that the contracting authorities must follow these rules. So first, the EU has established a comprehensive regulatory framework for public procurement made of the following. The EU Treaty, the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which contains fundamental principles such as prohibition against discrimination on ground of nationality, the famous 4 freedoms, which means in practice for, in our case, free movement of goods, but also freedom to provide services and freedom of establishment. Then there are so-called general principles of law. They often come from the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union, And those principles include equality of treatment, transparency, mutual recognition, proportionality. Then guidance has been provided in terms of a series of procurement directives. So the main one is the Public Sector Directive of 2014 that applies to all sectors except those covered by the Utilities Directives, which focus on water, energy, transport, and postal service sectors. And then there are more specific directives dealing with issues such as concessions and remedies. Importantly, directives must be transposed into national laws to become effective at national level. And that takes around 2 years as from the entry into force of the directive. And by the way, all 27 member states have transposed those directives. So the public procurement rules are governed at EU level by the directives directly, but at national levels, they are governed by the national laws that transpose the directives and that generally supersede the directives in case of inconsistencies. So let's complete this lesson by examining the challenges and opportunities when dealing with governments. It's an excellent way to summarize the entire lesson. So first, the challenges. Well, arguably the most important one is simply the lower price can win a tender. Yes, you heard it right. The lower price can win a tender. This is why business often hate public procurement. They rather prefer the flexibility of private contractual negotiations and often higher margin and profitability that results from such arrangements. Also, large players much prefer to be able to leverage their market power or dominant position in the private sector. There is more competition in the case of public procurement. Remember this principle of transparency? It applies in the case of public procurement, and it includes the obligation to ensure the broadest possible competition. Again, another good reason for certain businesses to hate public procurement. Third, the key challenge is also that the winner takes it all. That could well be the end result of a tender. Well, a large business may like it, especially if they won the tender, but it could be a significant issue for smaller players, which could be as a result out of business. There are, I'm afraid, complex and strict rules when dealing with governments. Clearly this is a challenge, and I hope that these lessons will help overcoming it. There are financial and legal risks when dealing with governments. There are budgetary constraints. Public authorities have, I would say, by definition, a limited budget, and also they must carefully allocate funds and prioritize projects. And last but not least, startup and SME often face difficulties and specific challenges. We will discuss these during these lessons, but just let me pick a few. Well, administrative burdens, the financial requirements to participate to procurement, a low success rate in public funding programs, there could be political interference, there could be favoritism, and the IBM syndrome. You know what? Nobody gets fired for selecting IBM. But on the positive note, when dealing with governments, there could be many opportunities. And you know what? It's often a must-have, a survival issue for many businesses. But so first, there is plenty of support for startups and SMEs. That's the good news. The mantra, small is beautiful, remains popular in the EU. And often, there are even quotas, which forces the procurement authorities to include a certain number of startups and SMEs into a consortium, for instance. There is, after all, a fair chance to bid for tender. Clearly, that's the intention of the public procurement rules, and that's the case in reality. There is no discrimination, and there are transparent tendering procedures. That's also the intention. The possibility for innovation and socially responsible procurement arguably presents opportunities, including for your business. You could contribute to saving the planet. Public-private partnerships are also possible, and that's the case especially in public funding programs where a consortium involves a mix of large and small businesses. There are many inclusive policies that promote diversity and inclusion in procurement. And these policies may be an opportunity for you. For instance, certain suppliers, let's say, established in third countries or controlled by third-party interest, may be not qualified to participate to tender. So, the key takeaway to summarize this lesson is as follows. Balancing these challenges and opportunities requires a strategic approach. This is why we need to deep dive into how public procurement and public programs work in practice and how they create opportunities for governmental sales. So, to summarize it all, only truly excellent proposals have a chance to get funding.